Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and welcome back to Grand Rounds. Please remember to fill out the attendance record at the back of the auditorium, and also please remember to fill out the program evaluations and turn those back in. And if you could give us ideas in regards to future topics or future speakers, we would appreciate that. Our speakers today are Meg Rodriguez and Rachel Glissman from the Iowa Donor Network. Ms. Rodriguez is a Donation Services Coordinator, and Ms. Glissman is Organ Donation Coordinator with the Iowa Donor Network. Their topic today is the physician's role in organ donation, and please join me in welcoming Meg Rodriguez and Rachel Glissman.
Thank you. Okay, well, thanks for having us today. Can you hear me okay? There we go. My portion I'm going to go through pretty quickly. I just wanted to give you a little background. We're doing some objectives so that you can get your CMEs. And then Rachel's really going to focus more on the piece of the puzzle that directly affects physicians. So as we go through this, if I get going too fast, stop me. If you have questions, we're totally open to questions during or after. That's fine. We are going to talk about the role of the physician in the donation process, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some tools. I did create a couple of handouts there up on that table in the back. What you need to know, which kind of goes over some of the information Rachel will cover. And then also this physician toolbox is specific to Mary Greeley and to your tools that are here at the hospital. So please feel free to pick up one of those. We're going to talk about CMS, HIPAA, the UAJ, just briefly in some data. And then we're going to really focus on best practices that have been adapted from a nationwide collaborative that we've been a part of, talking about huddling, brain death testing, family approach, and then talking a little bit about donor family care support and our follow-up after donation. So, 1968 Uniform Anatomical Gift Act, that's when organ and tissue donation were legalized. Every state then adopted their own version. And in 2002, Iowa did amend their UAGA law to what we call first-person consent. So just for your own information, if you don't already know, first-person consent means that if you have a yes in your driver's license or you're signed up in the donor registry, that is a legally binding document of gift and irrevocable by a third party. The only exception to that is the medical examiner, who can restrict if they feel like it's going to prohibit their investigation. That being said, so legally we should be following somebody's wishes if they want to be a donor, if they have it documented somewhere. That being said, it does not change our approach with the family. It doesn't change how we work together with the staff or how we sit down and we slow things down and we really have a conversation with that family, a dialogue with them, making sure they understand everything that's going on. Sometimes people ask what happens if the family refuses, even if they do have a yes in their driver's license. The handful of times that's happened, usually we're able to sit down with the family, talk to them about it. They come around, they say, you know what, you're right, it's what she'd want to do, I know that. Sometimes this is a shock of everything going on and the stress. However, there's been a handful of times, and sometimes with tissue we'll see this when we don't really have a chance because we're not in person on site talking to that family, where we have had to walk away if the family is resisting, even if that person had a yes. So sort of on the public side of that, it's really important to talk to your family about your wishes for donation, make it very clear what you want to have happen and why, and that does help them when those decisions have to be made. The other piece I just want to touch on briefly, so CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, where hospitals get part of their funding, they have a couple of regulations that pertain specifically to donation. One is that every single death and imminent death must be called into Iowa Donor Network or the OPO in your state, and that it must be somebody from your OPO that talks to the family about donation. And we're going to cover how we make sure that we're compliant with those regulations. And then obviously HIPAA there at the end, we always like to make sure people know, especially when we work with out-of-hospital agencies like EMS, medical examiners, first responders. We encourage those agencies outside of the hospital to give us a call as well when they have a death. And HIPAA does allow that healthcare professionals can disclose that protected patient information to us, whether it's out of the hospital or in hospital. Everyone's, I'm sure, pretty familiar with the fact that we have a very critical need for organs in this country. Right now, as of June 1st, over 123,000 in this country are waiting for their life-saving organ transplant, 595 in Iowa. That number in Iowa doesn't reflect everybody that needs a transplant in Iowa. It reflects people that are registered at the transplant centers here. You could have somebody that lives over in up in the northeast corner of the state that's listed at Mayo, so they wouldn't be listed in this number, but it gives you a general ballpark figure. So with that many people waiting, and you'll see here, 28,000 organ transplants are done every year. with over 123,000 people waiting. So you can see that disparity. Over 45,000 corneal transplants and over 1 million tissue transplants are done every year. Every 10 minutes, there's another name added to that national organ waiting list. And every day, 21 people die while waiting for a life-saving transplant. So again, just to reiterate, there is that need for it. And that's why it's important that we have days like today where we talk about the process and how can we improve it and how can we work together as a team to best meet the needs of the family and to try and maximize the gift that they're giving. So the impact of that person's decision to be a donor can save the lives of up to 8 people and enhance the lives of more than 300 people. So some specific data for Mary Greeley, just in case you're interested. Everyone here does such a great job of making those referral calls, supporting the process, supporting the families, working with Iowa Donor Network, and really being good collaborators. So you'll see there for the tissue numbers, that's the green bar. Last year we had 13, so that was really a pretty high number. You see a spike there. For organ donors, it's unique. I don't really see this at any other hospital. But here at Mary Greeley, for a long time now, every other year we have an organ donor. It's just been like clockwork. This is 2015, so we are due for one this year. I don't know if we'll follow that trend or not, but it has sort of been that way for a while. The imminent death referral rate is, does staff call in when they have a patient that meets that clinical trigger per CMS guidelines? That clinical trigger, which we'll touch on, is a patient on a ventilator with 2 or more absent brainstem reflexes. Do they make that imminent death referral? So that's something that's tracked. And you'll see there for the first couple of years, kind of down near the bottom, and then shot up to 100%, and staff has done a great job up in the ICU of maintaining that really high level. The donor conversion rate, one of the healthcare collaborative's goals was to have a 75% conversion rate. And I talked about one every other year. So we had one in 2009, we had one potential, one donor, same in 2013. In 2011, we had a little bit of a difference there. We had the one organ donor, but we actually had 3 potential. One of those cases, the family did decline. They didn't wish to proceed with organ donation. And the other one, the family did consent. And when we started the donor management process, she cardiac arrested on the vent. And so we were not able to move forward. So that factored into that conversion rate. And then one thing that we look at for tissue donors is the appropriate requester rate, making sure that it is somebody from Iowa Donor Network that approaches the family. You'll see again, doing all right around 75% up to 80, and then all of a sudden Mary Greeley did a great job, shot up to 100%, well above the benchmark that we've set, and has maintained that requester rate. I did pull some data for you compared to other hospitals in the area, not necessarily hospitals of the same size, but just from central Iowa. And you'll see there how Mary Greeley is the blue line, had that dip there in the imminent referral rate, but then shot right up there to 100% and has been sort of ahead of the pack there with that referral rate. Again, with the conversion rate, right up there at the top, except for that year in 2011 where it dropped down. That being said, it's a little bit difficult. You know, the percentages are different when you're a smaller hospital, right? So it's a little bit unfair sometimes to compare smaller size hospital, larger size hospital, because they have a lot more potential. And when you have only 3 and one of those, you know, one is the converted donor, the other 2 don't, it really does affect your percentage. The tissue, and then these next 2 slides I wanted to show because they really show one of these best practices at work. So you'll see here the appropriate requester rate that we talked about compared to the other hospitals. Mary Greeley's doing a great job, way above the rest of the pack there in the last couple of years. And that then is directly reflected in our tissue consent rate. So because we are following that appropriate requester rate, we see that, again, Mary Greeley is sort of ahead of the other 3 hospitals in central Iowa when it comes to tissue consent. Nothing too outstanding here when we talk about the donation possibilities. Everyone's very familiar with the organs that can be transplanted. Tissue is a little bit different. Most families are not familiar with tissue grafts, what they are, what they do, how they help people. That is a really important piece of the conversation. Rachel and I both work with families, and we can both tell you that when we sit down and have that informed discussion with families, that's a piece they don't know much about, and that we do sort of sit down and talk about. We can recover corneas. This is how it can help other people. We can recover bone, and this is how it can help somebody with bone cancer, or skin for burn victims. So we do go over all those tissue grafts. It is very important to inform families what that all means, and not just to have them say, oh gosh, no, we don't want to hear anything about that. We don't know about that. It's much more important to have them hear about it and then make the decision that's right for them. So briefly, you'll see some of the uses there on the right side of that graft, how those tissue grafts can help other people. Skin is primarily for burn victims. Bone is for saving limbs and replacing joints. Heart valves, most people are familiar with heart valves, for heart defects and disease. Something unique about heart valves, a lot of our tissue grafts, we can only go down to the age of 12, but with heart valves, we can go as small as 6 pounds. which I know is pretty sad when we think about how small that infant must be, that 6 pounds, that unfortunately did not survive. But knowing that it's going to help another infant of that same size who then is not going to face as many heart valve transplants in their life because of that amazing gift. Adipose tissue is something that's a little bit unique. We actually recover adipose tissue for the stem cells, and that's to promote healing and regenerating bone growth. So we do that in conjunction with the bones that we recover. One thing I don't think I mentioned, but it's important to know, something else we tell families, a complete reconstruction is always done when we do an organ and a tissue recovery or just a tissue recovery. So you absolutely can have an open casket or a viewing. There's no way to tell that that person was a donor unless the family decides that they want to share that information with others. Connective tissue is another one that I often find families can identify with. They often know somebody who's had an ACL or a PCL repair, some sort of sports injury, or they're familiar with one of their favorite athletes who suffered some sort of injury and then went through that surgery and was able to play professional sports again. Saphenous and femoral veins, like many tissue grafts, they prefer to use a person's own if they can, but if they're too damaged or too weak, then they use the donated ones. Corneas can actually repair somebody's vision, an amazing gift. And then DTA, that's something that's new. It's in the research phase right now. We're very excited about it. We've been involved for a little over 2 years now with a company called Humacyte, and I'm going to spend a little more on that in just a second here. Here's some pictures for you, in case you're wondering what some of those tissue grafts look like. For those of you that work in surgery, you've probably seen these before, but you can see all the different kinds and what they help with: spinal fusions, hip replacement, bone grafts when you have somebody that has a severe bone fracture, bone cancer. So the Humacyte, the DTA graft, the descending thoracic aorta graft, like I said, it's in research phase right now, but we're partnering with a company called Humacyte who started developing their own vasculature. You'll see there they take the DTA cells, they place them on a scaffolding, and they grow the vasculature that they want. They started with cabbages, really successful, so they started doing fistulas. Wow, this is great. Those fistulas are staying nice and open, they're not clotting, they're not collapsing. This is a really successful graft. One of the reasons is they find it has the strength of an artery and the flexibility of a vein. And also that the recipients aren't rejecting it and they're not clotting. So it was hugely successful, and then the Department of Military gave them a grant and said, we want you to develop vasculature to take out into the field where we have soldiers who are losing limbs so that they can do a temporary reattachment until they can get them to the field hospital in Germany. So you'll see there at the very bottom, the first soldier jump bags overseas to restore blood flow to injured limbs until hospital access is available. This is a really good example of why it's important that we have these conversations with families. Because to be able to go to a family and say, this is how your loved one can help others, or by following your loved one's wishes, this is a really tangible example. It's really, it's easier for them to understand, oh, with a heart transplant, they get a second chance at life, it saves their life. Sometimes with tissue, it's not as easy to understand what's that connection, how does it really help people? And I can't stress enough, and I won't spend much more time on this, but I can't stress enough, it's not just recipients that benefit from donation. If you've ever known anyone who their loved one died and was a donor, or somebody in their family was a donor, it means a lot to those families as well. It becomes a part of their healing process. It's, yes? Descending thoracic aorta. Sorry, I kind of skimmed right. I'm trying to go so fast because Rachel's part is a lot more interesting than mine, but yes, descending thoracic aorta. It also doesn't preclude transplanting the heart. We can still do that if we're transplanting the heart. Okay. So this is a quick 2-minute video just because I wanted to put in a few little things for to break it up a little bit. It's a really amazing video that talks about the impact of tissue donation.
"13 years ago, I was a junior in high school, and one day I found myself at school hiding in a library as 2 boys came in to shoot anybody in their way. As I hid, I knew that I would be shot, and I kind of waited my turn and turned to see a 12-gauge sawed-off shotgun pointed at me. The bullet came and it shattered my shoulder and grazed across my neck. I sat there bleeding and starting to struggle to get breath when finally our chance to escape came, and I was able to run outside, and 10 to 15 minutes later reached a point of safety, was headed to the ER wondering if I was going to lose my arm because the damage was so bad. The next, week was spent talking with surgeons nationwide about what to do with my one-of-a-kind trauma and wondering if there were ways to avoid amputation. And when we thought there was no chance, Dr. Wilkins here in Denver was willing to attempt salvaging my arm with an allograft. And so he used an allograft from a tissue donor to rebuild my shoulder. And 14 years later, I still have that same allograft and am able to live life, and with some limitations, of course, but hold my kids and cook them dinner and look like a normal person. And like I said, giving me a second chance at life again. I would love to tell them thank you and to encourage others that donating tissue is life-saving. It's not just life-changing.
Okay, so again, it's, Columbine is one of those things that's so, it seems like it wasn't that long ago. I couldn't believe when we saw her speak that it was actually that long ago. But it is a nice example of that. So what is your role, especially as physicians? What we refer to it as is dual advocacy. You are the link between a potential donor who can offer hope and the recipients who are waiting for a life-changing gift, like the young woman in the video. So I referred to the collaborative. So we're trying to increase the conversion rate, how many donors out of the potential pool of medically suitable and brain dead, organs transplanted per donor, maximizing that gift, and then also talking about donation after cardiac death, which Rachel's going to touch on all this briefly. But we found 4 best practices around the country in working together with other hospitals and other OPOs. Consistent and timely referrals, grave prognosis and family preparation, preserving the opportunity for donation, and then timely brain death recognition and appropriate testing. I do want to acknowledge, though, and this is important, this is a really important piece. We know that when you have a patient that comes in and you're desperately, for anyone in the hospital, you're desperately trying to save that life, it is not always an easy turn to make, to start talking about what's going to happen now that we have essentially failed at saving them, and the emotion that goes along with that as well, that now we have to start thinking about and talking to the family about what comes next. So I actually took this from somebody else's PowerPoint that was doing physician education, but they call it the U-turn, when hope for recovery can become hope through donation. So you start with the aggressive treatment, you go through the deteriorating condition, you start preparing that family for the negative outcome, the grave prognosis, that declaration of death and support of the family. And at this point, Iowa Donor Network has become a part of that team, that end of healthcare team that's coming in to act as a consult to talk to that family about these are your opportunities for donation now. And then working to preserve the option, donation discussion, supportive donor management, and then life-saving transplants. We have trigger cards that staff here have where they know to call Iowa Donor Network within 2 to 4 hours of every ventilated patient. Obviously, they're doing a great job. Thanks to Amy and her staff up there, those imminent referrals are being called in. What they're looking at when they're assessing those reflexes, pupils, corneals, cough, gag, spontaneous respirations, motor response, ice water chlorics, and doll's eye. And on the back of that trigger card, you'll see what the brain death testing prerequisites are, which Rachel will cover, and then brain death determination, that it must be 2 physicians, 2 different exams, an apnea test, an ancillary test if indicated. And I won't spend much time on this. Like I said, she'll be touching on it. The other piece that's really important that I want to touch on before the next piece is the donation huddle, and that's when we start to work together as a team. Looking at Iowa Donor Network as a consult. So call us when you have a patient meeting that trigger, and then before anything is said to that patient, we have a huddle and we talk about what do we have to offer? Are they on the donor registry? What are the family dynamics? Do we need to go in together, or do we need to have a chaplain or a social worker come in to help us? Figuring out what our game plan is that's best going to meet the needs of that family, because it's going to be different. And then talking about the right time, the right place, and the right person to offer that donation option. So Iowa Donor Network serves the hospital's designated requester, and again, the CMS regs state it has to be Iowa Donor Network that approaches the family. We have several goals that we want to speak directly to the family, that the family is aware of first person consent, of the donation opportunity. They're provided information about the process. This all goes back to what I said earlier, slowing things down, taking the time, taking the family aside and giving them information, giving them a chance to absorb the shock of what's happened, and not just going up to the bedside, we're so sorry we couldn't help. Meg, do you want to donate? Okay, that's all right. Because that's kind of how it used to happen, and not because people didn't support donation, but because it was a very uncomfortable situation, and we didn't have anything better in place. Now we have something better in place where we slow things down, we bring in Iowa Donor Network, we have a team approach. And then preparing the family. The thing I wanted to say about this, and this is all sort of common sense, where we're working together, and ideally in the end, then it's Iowa donor work that goes in and has that conversation either alone or with the physician. I actually here at Meg Rodriguez several times I've gone in with the physician as a team and just talked to the family about what's going to happen next, and that's worked really well. But keeping in mind that donation is a conversation. It's not just a question, and it's never merely a mention. It's not that, ooh, we're really uncomfortable, we're just going to bring it up, and then whatever they say, that's what we'll go with. So we have a little example in case you've never had to do before or looking for some direction with that. As part of our end-of-life care at Mary Greeley Medical Center, we connect families with a coordinator from Iowa Donor Network. They will give you information about the opportunity for organ and tissue donation. Families tell us they are able to better make decisions once they have all the information from a coordinator. However you want to say, but that's basically what you're doing. You're telling them, we have somebody that's going to come and talk to you about this. They're going to give you information so you can make the right decision. It's not saying, do you want to donate or do you want to talk to them? It's just telling them somebody will be coming in to give them information. And now Rachel will take over.
Thanks, Meg. Do I need to switch over? Can you guys hear me back there? Good? Okay, so one thing I did want to touch on that Meg was talking about when we go and approach a family, it does work a lot better when we have somebody from the hospital staff along with us because you've already developed that relationship with the family. And so if we just go in by ourselves and, I'm here to talk about donation, a lot of times the family, first of all, doesn't trust us because they have no idea what we're doing there. And then they kind of feel like, so the hospital just dropped us and now they're going to give us to Iowa Donor Network. So if we work together and go in and have that conversation as a team, it usually goes much smoother with the family. So preserving the opportunity for donation, when you have somebody come in with a catastrophic brain injury, we always suggest, we can't tell anybody what to do, but we always suggest following the CBIG, so the Catastrophic Brain Injury Guidelines, which is essentially good patient care, what you already do in your ICU. So keeping the blood pressure above 100, because that is a prerequisite for brain death testing. Treating DI. Most people that progress to brain death, they go into DI, they have large amounts of urine output, and a lot of times they're behind on fluid. We want to keep them oxygenated well, we want to keep their pH normal, keep their labs normal. Obviously if they're like a gunshot to the head or in DIC, we do want to make sure we give blood products if needed. All the good things that you already do in the ICU. So for brain death testing, you keep somebody stable and you treat them and you get to the point where you say, all the paralytics are out of their system, there's nothing else that we can do. We think this patient's progressed to brain death. And, we want to get to the point where we are communicating with you and you're telling us this is where we're at with the patient. So, you follow the brain death testing. Did you bring a copy of their policy up there? Okay. So we follow the AAN guidelines, but we also have to follow the hospital's policy for brain death testing, which I think they all across the state of Iowa are pretty much the same nowadays. So there's two ways that somebody can be an organ donor. They can either progress to brain death, or they can get to a point where they're not going to get any better. They have a severe brain injury, but they haven't progressed to brain death, so they could be a donor after cardiac death. I don't know that we've had any cardiac death donors here for a long time. Ever? No? Meg knows all the data better than I do for the hospital. But that would be where somebody will pass away within 60 minutes, or we think very strongly that they would. We would take them to the operating room, and that's where they would be extubated. The physician, the attending physician, usually would pronounce death in the OR, and we would recover organs at that point. So signs of herniation, which we I think all the ICU nurses, there's a lot of ICU nurses here, right? I see a lot of physicians, but I see a lot of nurses. When you see your patient who's in the ICU, they get really hypertensive and then they bottom out their blood pressure, they get bradycardic, they have temperature issues, they have very irregular breathing, and then shortly after that, they have no more brainstem reflexes. That's usually at the point where that patient has herniated. Usually they get very unstable. You may have to give multiple pressors, fluid, whatever you have to do to maintain that patient through herniation. And then brain death testing prerequisites, which we kind of talked about already. You have to know why that patient has a severe brain injury. It can't just be somebody that showed up in the ER and nobody has any idea what happened to them. There has to be a known cause. All of the paralytics and sedation need to be out of their system. We have had some hospitals, it has not happened here, where we come in, patient's been pronounced brain dead ×2, and we walk into the room and they're on 150 mics of fentanyl. Well, that patient can't be brain dead at that time because obviously they're sedated. So we always want to look at their kidney and liver function along with if they're on any sedation. We want to make sure that's off long enough prior to testing that it's out of their system. And then we talked about, their pH needs to be normal, labs need to be normal, their blood pressure, their temperature, and then obviously they can't be breathing. You cannot be brain dead and be breathing at the same time. So in the state of Iowa, which this is different in every state, it does require 2 attending physicians. I understand you guys do not have residents here at Mary Greeley. We do have medical students. They cannot do brain death testing. Someday they can, but not when they're a medical student. And there has to be 2 attending physicians in the state of Iowa. And then you have to follow your hospital's policy and the AAN guidelines in order to pronounce brain death. In the Epic here, do they have a checklist? No. Okay. So we're working throughout the state on getting brain death checklists put into the computer charting. Hopefully someday that will come here. Oh, okay. Meg's going to talk about that, so I'll stop. An apnea test is required if the patient's stable enough. So we want to go 8 minutes off the ventilator. Obviously, you want to give them some sort of oxygen. Here, I believe you use just the end of an O2 tubing down the ET2. 8 minutes, you want to see a rise in the CO2 of 20 or greater than 60. And then if you're unable to do an apnea test, you would need to do an EEG or a flow study. So any questions so far on the brain death testing and getting to the point of brain death? No, everybody's really quiet. So when we have a patient who is pronounced brain dead, one of our IDN coordinators will come on site, which Meg's probably already been here by that time, but we would come on site to start the case. So if the patient was a DNR, we make them a full code. We want all of our brain dead organ donors to be a full code. We start ANSEF for an antibiotic coverage. We do 2 ABOs because we have to confirm the blood type. So they have to be 2 separate draw times. And then we send off serologies to Chicago for HIV, Hep B, Hep C, West Nile virus, HTLV, RPR, everything you can think of we test for. We'll want to put in ART lines and central lines if they're not already placed. So those are the phone calls to the physician. We try to catch you during the daytime if you're here. We try not to call in the middle of the night for lines, but if you would get a phone call in the middle of the night and we need a central line, it's because the patient's unstable and we just need to give them pressors. Chest x-rays, bronchs, EKGs, echoes, angiograms, whatever we need to do to evaluate every organ in its entirety for transplant. And then the nursing staff, we would want hourly I's and O's, and then just good patient care like you already do. So pediatrics, we don't see peds organ donors here. Typically, I don't know that we ever would. A lot of times they're transferred out, I think, when they come into your ER. But if we do have a pediatric donor, there are some special considerations for them. We don't ever want to pronounce a pediatric donor within that first 24 hours, especially if it's a cardiac arrest. We want to give them time outside of that window. 31 days to 18 years old, they do require a 12-hour wait time in between the 2 exams unless they do an ancillary test. And then for newborns, they have to do 2 tests 24 hours apart. And I believe under the age of 37 weeks gestation, it's a 7-day wait time. So we haven't had any that small for organ donors, but the smaller they get, the longer the window is in between tests. For DCD donors, we cannot come in and put in all the orders for a donor. It does have to be the attending physician, so we work very closely with you guys We'll tell you what we need, but we don't do anything invasive because the patient has not been declared dead at that time. So we have a few protocols that we use. Well, all of our donor management is protocol-based, and it's all approved by our medical advisory committee and board of directors. So that's what we use for all of our treatment on all of our donors. We have a few protocols within that we'll use for certain things that happen. So our T4 protocol is for donors who are on a lot of pressors. We do carry this medication with us because not every hospital has it. But if we have somebody who is very unstable on multiple pressors, we do want to give them T4 to help get those pressors weaned down. So that is levothyroxine, which is a replacement for the T4 that you lose when you progress to brain death. So we kind of talked about that. Along with the T4, we give an AMPA D50, 20 units of insulin, 20 mics of the T4 out of the vial, and then 2 grams of Solumedrol, all rapidly together, and then we start the drip after that. And this is something that if we come on site for a donor, we would walk you through every step of this process. So our gunshot/DIC protocol is here. A lot of times with the vitamin K, by the time that we take over, that patient's already pretty far out from their injury. So when we get a referral, we might suggest, like, do you guys want to give vitamin K? It takes a long time to actually work. And then, obviously if you have a traumatic brain injury, you're already treating with everything else on this list. The FlowTrack or LIDCO, I'm not sure if you guys have them. Does anybody know? Where's Amy at? I don't know if you have this monitoring device. We do have a couple of them that our coordinators will bring with. We usually use it for our thoracic donors and to monitor the stroke volume variation in order to maintain fluid balance. And then our SALT protocol, which is adopted from the San Antonio lung transplant protocol. We utilize this in order to transplant lungs, and we do have evidence. We're a small OPO, so we don't have a ton of lung donors, but we do have evidence from using this for the last couple of years that this protocol has helped us increase our lungs transplanted. And it's just basically a huge recruitment maneuver that we would repeat as many times as we need to get the lungs opened up. So the role of the physician, which we've kind of talked about the whole entire hour that we've been here, half hour. Obviously, aggressive treatment and maintaining any potential organ donors through the process of herniation and then through the process of donation as well. Huddling with IDN staff, usually, especially in smaller hospitals, we always talk to the bedside nurse, but the smaller hospitals we go to, like here, the physicians are much more willing to talk to us directly and, kind of walk through the process rather than having us talk to the nurse and then the resident and then the physician. And, we kind of keep it smaller here, so we are talking directly to you guys. And then when we go in to talk to families, we just want to huddle with you and make sure that we're part of that conversation. So Meg's going to cover some warm, fuzzy stuff.
And the one thing I wanted to mention too about donation after cardiac death, because I know it's not something that we've done here and it's not very familiar, where we see that happen and why that was brought back into practice, it's actually how donation used to occur prior to 1968. It was non-heart beating donation then. And then once they came up with the legal definition for brain death, that's the way that organ donation started to occur. And around 2000, right about when I actually started working for Iowa Donor Network, hospitals around the country were starting to bring it back into practice. And the biggest reason for that was because there's such a critical need. Brain death only happens 1% to 2% of the time. It's a very rare occurrence. It's a very unique set of circumstances. And so we decided, we, meaning everyone around the country, decided that maybe it was time to bring that back into hospital policies. So hospital policies everywhere were rewritten, including Mary Greeley's, to address that. The important thing to remember about it is that it's family driven. And we're looking at a situation where a patient has deteriorated incredibly close to brain death. It's a point where the family has said, you know what, we're done. We've been through enough. They've been through enough. We know that they're gone. We know that they're not coming back. We know that who they are in essence is no longer here. And so they are extubating with the intent that that person will die. And like Rachel said, the criteria we look at then is if they're extubating because they expect them to pass away, and the family is interested in donation, then we're going to sit down and talk to that family. And if the physician thinks they will die within 60 to 90 minutes, and we know there's no way of knowing for sure, but it's just your best guess, and the family wants to move forward donation, then that's what we'll do. And that's when they then will take them down to the OR and extubate them in the OR instead of the ICU with all the same comfort care measures and still under the care of that attending physician and the bedside nurse. Iwodo Network is not in the room at that point except for one person, I believe, who has to chart things. But otherwise, the transplant team and Iwodo Network are out in the hallway and are not a part of that extubation process. So I just want to give you a little more information on that because I know we've never actually had one of those cases up here, and so it seems maybe a little bit like, whoa, I wonder what that's all about. So your available resources, like I said, you have a couple of handouts up there if you're interested. One of them is listed on this physician toolbox. So the Mary Greeley policy was actually updated last fall. I worked with Terry Jones and Amy McDonough as part of our hospital committee. We combined the adult and the pediatric and the brain death and the donation after cardiac death into one policy. That can be found in your administrative manual. In that policy, you're going to find a link that you can click on that takes you to your brain death checklist, which is a form for the physician to use to declare a patient brain dead. So I have a copy of each one of those up there, but that's how you can access it, is by going to your administrative manual. We have a couple of UNOS neuro rulers up there and trigger cards. We can get more of those, but a lot of those have already been distributed up here. But basically, it covers all the information we've already talked about today. And it's nice to have those resources there because if we don't have it happen very often, it's hard to remember, oh gosh, what did they say about, how do we do that? There's some online free CME opportunities. You'll see in this physician toolbox handout over here on the right. But you'll see here hospital policy and where you can find it in the physician checklist, where you can find it. And then also on the bottom, you'll see that we do have a hospital committee that reviews data, looks at the process. We'll plan donation awareness events in April. We are looking for a physician champion, if anyone's interested. The biggest reason for that is because when we look at updating things like that physician checklist or the policy, we really like to have a physician input because you all are the ones that are going to be declaring the patient brain dead. But we also have a couple of processes, ethical issues that have come up at our last meeting when we talked to the ethics committee about this policy that we really want to look at what will our process be here at Mary Greeley if this happens. So for example, if you had a brain dead woman that came in that was pregnant, how do you proceed? What if the family wants to extubate? When is it viable, when is it not? So it was something that members of the ethics committee had brought some articles that they had found that we started a conversation about, but we really need to implement a process here, and we really would like to have physician input on that. So that's what we're looking for when we say physician champion. So Amy McDonough is the chair. Let her know if you or someone you know thinks you might want to be that person or a couple of people. We're not asking a lot, maybe just a couple of meetings to get your input, or even through email, just get your input on some of these issues. And then I think the last thing I have, also Iwodo Network just launched our new website last month in April. It has some great resources that we've already referred to. If you go to hospital professionals on that top green bar, you'll be able to pull up a lot of these things like the T4 protocol, Cushing's triad, when is brain death happening, what's herniation look like, all those things are there. Then the last thing is just to let you know what we do to care for our families. We don't want you to think that we just work with the family and then after they go home that we don't speak to them again. We do have a process in place. We have a donor family advocate that will be assigned to each family. They then will call that family after the OR to let them know what was transplanted. They call within, I think it's a 2-week period. Do I have that next one? Nope, I don't. Okay. They send letters and they call intermittently throughout the next 2 years, inviting them to donor family events, letting them know the resources that are out there. If they have children, that there's Amanda the Panda, or different things like that, different therapy groups, things to help support them. When they're in the hospital, we have a couple of things. We have the hand embossing that we can do. We have quilts that we provide to each organ donor family. We have a moment of silence, which is we give the family an opportunity to write something about who their loved one is, what they mean to them, what their likes and dislikes are, whatever they want to write. And then we just started this maybe 1.5 years, 2 years ago. We take what the family's written. Sometimes we have to condense it because we say write whatever you want to. We really want it to be therapeutic for them as well. But we take the essence of what they've written, we take it into the OR. The team is running around getting everything all ready. It's kind of chaotic. And then the coordinator will stop everybody and say, okay, before we start, first of all, this is who this is. This is what we're doing today. These are the organs we're recovering. And this is something that the family has written. And they read it. And then we take a 30-second moment of silence to honor that person, to honor their gift, and their family, and to let everybody know a little bit about who they are. It's been a really lovely program. I've read it once, and it was incredibly difficult because you're crying and you're trying to breathe through the mask, but it means an awful lot to the families, and we've gotten very good feedback from OR staff. Then back to the personal care pack. I say that for last because that is directly related to Mary Greeley Medical Center and the amazing work that you all do here. You're probably familiar with the Holiday Bazaar. I'm sorry that Amy had to leave because this is she and Jeannie Roger are a huge part of this. The committee did a fundraiser a couple of years ago. It was really successful. It was a bake sale. The money went to a local recipient, kidney recipient, who needed some financial help. The next year, we raised, I think it was over twice the amount of money, or even 3 times, an amazing amount of money. So they chose another recipient that was local, and then the other part of that, the money that was raised, went to an incredibly exciting program that we have for our families, and it's the personal care packet. We've just put them all together. We've just distributed them to everybody in the last few weeks. And what they are is they're toiletry kits that in those kits, there's a toothbrush, there's toothpaste, there's saline solution, a contact lens case, a hairbrush, a comb, a tie. We have them for men and for women, so we have deodorant for men, deodorant for women. Just whatever family might potentially need when they are unexpectedly in the hospital for several days and don't have access to the things that they need. Just little comfort cares. In there's also a card that said that this gift is due thanks to Mary Greeley Medical Center and their partnership with Iowa Donor Network. So a huge thanks to everyone who came and bought goodies at the bake sale or who supported in other ways or the silent auction. It's really going to be a great program, I think, in showing the families that we are trying to support them and that we do care about them. This is an example of a moment of silence, actually, from one just recently, and I'm sharing it because it was a family I worked with. So this is an example of what you might hear. This is Cole's daddy, Brock's uncle, Amy's brother, and my son. Jason loved the outdoors, canoeing, camping, biking, and tennis. He was an avid Royals and Hawkeye fan, and he cheered the Royals every step of the way when they went to the World Series. Many a Friday before a Saturday football game, I would email him a simple "Go Hawks," and too often I would get a reply back with "Not a great day to be a Hawkeye." Jason battled addiction most of his adult life, but the battle is over and Jason has won. He is at peace, and if his passing can give just one person a better life, then Cole's daddy, Brock's uncle, Amy's brother, and my son will not have died in vain. And like I said, that's why it's really important for people to know, even though it might be a really uncomfortable situation, it might be a really traumatic thing that's happened, might be a lot of dynamics going on, like, oh, there's no way this family's going to want to, or it's really uncomfortable. We have to take ourselves outside of our comfort zone and say, you know what, this could mean a lot to this family. It's not just about the recipients. It's about what it can mean to them and about that person. In this particular case, he had designated yes on his license. Once the family realized that, it was everything they could hold on to throughout those next couple of days. So please know that it does make a difference for a lot of people that are involved. The last thing I have is it's a 4-minute video, so it looks like we still have about 15 minutes left. We did good. So I don't know if anyone has any questions specifically for Rachel about donor management. I know we went through it pretty quickly, but we wanted to be, yes?
I got here late, but is there an age issue? I mean, the vast majority of people in the ICU that are going down are 80 plus.
Right, that's a great question. There is no age range per se. I think the oldest that we've got is 74 in Iowa.
That's actually transplanted.
That's actually transplanted. That was liver. I believe in the country the oldest maybe 82, I think is what I've heard. But you're correct. By the time you're getting up in that age range, you're looking at organs that have lived a long time and aren't functioning very well. We're usually looking at liver when they get up into the upper age range, but we never automatically rule out. Another thing is there's no medical rule out except for HIV positive at this point. I know there was one case I worked on, I think Rachel was there too, down in Des Moines, where the patient was Hep B and Hep C positive, and we still transplanted the liver. And that recipient is still doing well and actually was far worse off when they got into the OR than they thought she was. So it was a good thing that they did accept that liver. So we always come in with a thought that we're going to do everything we can to make donation happen. But there's the reality sometimes where they're just too sick or they're too old. Yes?
Yeah, one slide you showed the pre-harvest protocol, giving Salumedron thyroid.
Yes.
Can you, and maybe you said it and it went right above me since I'm retired now, but what's the purpose of that?
So when somebody progresses to brain death, they have a huge catecholamine release in their body. They can no longer regulate anything really. And the T4 is basically that hormone replacement for a live person being able to regulate their blood pressure, their temperature, and all of that. We don't know. Donation is a small enough world that we don't know if it is the T4 or if it's the huge dose of steroids that we give that actually does the trick and helps wean the pressors off. But we give, the T4 and the steroids together because we can't isolate the two and do a study to find out which is actually working.
That's why I brought her along. Are there any other questions or input, feedback? Has anyone worked with us before on a tissue or organ donor? Okay. One person. So it's probably fairly new information for some of you. And like I said, it's a lot of information we just threw at you in a very short amount of time, but you do have the packets up there, and I come up here usually at least once a month to round and see staff, and we have our committee meetings. So we're always happy to talk more at length about anything you're interested in. And anybody is welcome to be a part of the committee. It's a great group of people, very dedicated, and we may not have the same numbers that we have at other hospitals, but that doesn't mean it doesn't count as much, because for those families that donate, it means a lot to them, and for the recipients, it means a lot to them. So every donor does count, every recipient counts. So, and like you saw with the data, I'm so proud to work with Mary Greeley, because you look at that data compared to the other hospitals in the area, and those are the big hospitals. I can't name them because it's a blind study, but those are central Iowa hospitals some of them are bigger. So you guys do a great job here, and thank you for everything that you do, and we do come work with you. Yeah.
Would it make a difference? I'm sure it's a controversial thing, but would it make a difference, do you think, in your mind, opting out rather than opting in on the license?
That's a really great question. There are a lot of European countries that have what they call presumed consent, which means they're automatically a donor unless you document otherwise. You would have more donors that way, probably. I think the biggest thing for us and where we're coming from, when we, so I've been with IDN since before 2002, so I was there when we adopted that law, and a lot of the discussion that was going on. And really what we felt pretty strongly about was that we want it to be an informed decision, and when you're waiting in line at the DMV and all you want to do is get your license and get out because you've been there for an hour, it's not really an informed decision if they say, hey, do you want to do this, this, and this? Oh, okay, yeah. And sometimes I've had people tell me that they weren't even asked when they renewed their license about donations. So we do have a donor registry where people can go online and sign up that way. I still think the most important thing, though, is to talk to families, because like I said, we've had to walk away before, and the families that have told me no, in my experience anyway, and I'm not the only one that talks to families, but the families I've talked to that have told me no, the few times it's happened, they have literally said, we would do it. We're donors, we have a yes, but we just don't know what they want to do, and we don't want to make the wrong decision. So it goes back to that whole idea of one, they didn't document on their license, or they just didn't have that conversation, which I know it's not a fun conversation because nobody wants to talk about it, but I think you're right, we would have more donors that way, but I don't know what kind of success they have in those countries where they have that law. I know some places do it. Any other questions? Or if I keep talking, maybe you guys will have some more. Okay, well, I do have a quick video, this last one, and this is related to organ donation. It's about 4 minutes. And this is a donor family member who's from Iowa. His recipient is in this video, who's actually from Omaha. They came and spoke together down in Des Moines last year, and they've started, Joey's done a lot of speaking around the state, so he's become a really big champion. And if you ever watch NASCAR, then maybe you recognize his name and his story.
At first glance, Jordan Shaw seems to have very little in common with today's top drivers. The 26-year-old has had a history of life-threatening kidney problems and underwent a failed transplant when he was 16 years old. He's been waiting for a new one ever since.
When I knew I needed another transplant, there was a little, almost depression. You don't like to think about that. I just went on my days and hoped I would get a phone call getting that transplant.
Through his own tragic circumstances, Nationwide driver Joey Gase would create a connection and a lifelong fan. It was 2 years ago that the then 18-year-old Gase found his mother collapsed in their home.
And I saw my mom laying on the ground, and she was breathing really, really funny and weird. And then we went down to the hospital, and they had the doctors look at her, run a few tests, and they said that they don't think she's gonna make it.
Gase's mother, Mary, died that night from a brain aneurysm at the age of 44. But doctors gave Gase the opportunity to have her death contribute to life.
I had to sign all the paperwork because a few months before that was my 18th birthday and my mom wasn't married, so I was the one who had to do everything. And then they told us we had to start thinking about if she would want to be an organ and tissue donor. And so we thought about it, and we knew my mom, she always liked helping people.
Gase's decision meant that Jordan Shaw's 5-year wait for a second transplant was finally over.
The night before the transplant, I didn't sleep at all. You just have a lot of things going through your mind. You do think about the person that passed away. At least I did. How am I going to live this life to honor this person?
The surgery a success, Shaw has been living an active life since, but he never forgot the family whose gift saved him. He wrote a letter to Gase to express his thanks and got an invite to meet in return.
And in August of 2012, I got a letter from Joey Gase. And he said, I am a NASCAR driver out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And I have a race coming up next week in Newton, and I would love to have you there and meet you. I didn't hesitate at that at all. I went straight for it.
Nice to meet you too. Good. Feeling really good. Absolutely.
Finally putting a face, a name to my kidney, it really came full circle for me.
I can't say thank you enough, man. I can't say thank you enough.
Me and Jordan just put everything in perspective for me and my family, and knowing that my mom was able to live on through him and how big of an impact my mom made in his life.
I mean, you grew up fast. No, man, you're fine. Let it go. There's plenty of people that your mom helped. I don't want them. And I'm here.
Organ donation has become a platform for Gase, and in Iowa, he showcased his support for the cause with the Donate Life America car. His mother's image featured prominently on the hood.
I just feel so fortunate to be able to do that and also be able to honor my mom.
I mean, it's speechless. These people passed away and they've saved so many lives, me included. It's a pretty powerful picture. And then he drives the Nationwide car in front of thousands and thousands of people to get the word out for more people to become organ donors. It's kind of a awe-inspiring.
I forgot I should have given credit. That was an ESPN story, actually, that they gave us permission to use that video clip. We didn't do that. Anyway, so I just wanted to end with that, sort of a little connect to purpose, if you will, so that you can kind of see the impact. And once again, thank you for allowing us to come and talk to you today and share information, and we will stick around if you have any other questions. Thank you.
This is the last weekend of June.